On that chilly morning, as the sun struggled to penetrate the dense fog outside, I hurriedly prepared for school. My mother, the light sleeper that she was, still lay deep in dreams as I made my way out. I always kissed her goodbye, a tradition we'd maintained for as long as I could remember. But today was different. My head was swamped with thoughts of the impending test. With final exams around the corner, I felt every moment was crucial. The school day was a blur of anxious glances at clocks, scribbled answers, and sighs of relief. By 3:30 p.m., when I stepped back into my home, its silence greeted me. A home without my mother's presence always felt eerily empty. My stomach rumbled, reminding me of its needs, so I rustled up a quick sandwich and headed to our cozy basement. The basement, with its plush furniture and dimmed lights, was our comfort space. Even though it was underground, it felt more like an inviting den. On a whim, I decided to put on The Exorcist. Maybe, just maybe, a good horror flick would take my mind off the stressful exams. But as the terrifying images on the screen began to draw me in, I heard the front door's familiar creak. It was unmistakably my mother's footsteps. Relief washed over me, I wasn't alone anymore. Suddenly, an invisible weight pressed down on me, holding me glued to the couch. Panic set in as I tried to call out, but no sound escaped. My body felt detached, numb, as though it wasn't mine anymore. Then, in a terrifying twist, I began to float, my perspective shifting, and I found myself looking down at my own body lying motionless on the couch. Heart racing, I drifted upstairs, an unwilling spectator in this otherworldly experience. Through the dining room door, I saw her, my mother, stirring something on the stove, still dressed in her office attire. Memories of hushed conversations with my cousin surfaced, whispers about having the witches. They said it was a kind of out-of-body experience, but I had never given it much thought until now. A surge of adrenaline pushed me to fight this unseen force, to return to my body. The struggle felt eternal, a tug-of-war between two realms. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. With a jolt, I crashed back into my body, the force of the reunion shattering the glass on the table. My hand throbbed, bleeding from where shards had pierced it. Stumbling upstairs, the weight of the experience bearing down on me, I met my mother's eyes. They widened in shock as they landed on my injured hand, but even more so when I recounted what had just occurred. I described her arrival, her change of clothes, details I couldn't have possibly known. Her face drained of color, realizing I hadn't seen her depart that morning. We sat together, side by side, as the unsettling truth sank in. Whether it was the witching pull of an ancestral curse or a stress-induced phenomenon, I had experienced a realm few ever ventured into. And as we held onto each other that evening, the boundaries of reality seemed just a bit thinner, a bit more fragile than they ever had before. In our small town, everyone knew everyone else, and peculiarities, however small, were never left unnoticed. Such was the case with Tina. A quiet, unassuming girl with thick glasses that perpetually slid down her nose and an affinity for out-of-date fashion. But it wasn't just her introverted nature or her unusual sense of style that set her apart, it was her family background. Tina's father worked at the town's only funeral home. His job, one whispered about in hushed tones during school recesses, involved preparing the deceased for their final rest. Most of us couldn't imagine being that close to the departed. But Tina? She lived it, day in and day out. One fateful evening, my house became the gathering spot for our clique. We lounged around, swapping stories, and, as teenagers often do, we veered towards gossip. Tina's name came up, the easy target that she had unfortunately become. The atmosphere in the kitchen, where we had congregated, seemed to thicken. But before our jests could pick up steam, a sudden flare of light interrupted our chatter. The new stove, which was supposed to be dormant until the gas line connection, ignited. All 4 burners blazed brilliantly, a fiery sight that stole our collective breaths away. In a state of utter panic, we called for my father, who, hearing the ruckus, hurried down. As we tripped over each other to explain the inexplicable phenomenon, he looked at us with a mix of confusion and disbelief. "That's impossible," he declared. The logical reasons he presented made sense, but the fear in our eyes was undeniable. As we all nervously ventured back into the kitchen, the flames were gone. However, a new oddity greeted us. Every single cabinet door stood ajar, like open mouths in silent screams. The room felt colder, charged with an energy none of us could explain. The playful banter we once enjoyed had evaporated. An unspoken agreement passed between all of us. No more teasing, no more gossip, especially about Tina. We couldn't explain what had happened that evening, whether it was a bizarre malfunction or something more supernatural, but one thing was clear: we never wanted to experience it again. From that day on, Tina walked our school halls without a whisper or sneer from any of us. But every so often, when our eyes met, I wondered if she knew about that night, about the unexplained events that forever linked our lives in the most haunting of ways. In the peaceful year of 1993, I found myself stationed at an army base in the culturally rich state of Louisiana. Those were different times. The world seemed relatively calm, making the army life a little less intense than one would imagine. While stationed there, I began seeing Lisa, a local woman with striking features that matched the rich tapestry of stories and legends from the region. She had a mesmerizing presence that I couldn't resist. Despite being utterly captivated by her, I was often reminded of the cautionary tales my family would share about the mysterious traditions and practices of some Louisiana women. They spoke of voodoo, magic, and rituals involving live chickens. The more traditional members of my family emphasized the importance of being cautious around such matters. To me, these were just tales, meant to scare or simply old beliefs passed down through generations. One evening, after Lisa and I had shared a night of laughter, drinks, and dancing at a local joint, we decided to head to her place. The music from the jazz bars still echoed in my ears, blending seamlessly with the symphony of nocturnal creatures. She noticed my weariness and suggested I stay over. The invitation was comforting, and before long, I had succumbed to the night's exhaustion. Waking up in an unfamiliar room is always disconcerting. When I stirred, I realized Lisa was not beside me. I called out, my voice louder than I intended, almost echoing back at me. There was an eerie silence. The house seemed to hold its breath. Trying to shake off the feeling of unease, I thought perhaps she might have stepped out for an early morning errand. I decided to freshen up, hoping a shower might clear my head and the remnants of last night's alcohol. But as I wrapped a towel around my waist and ventured into her living room, the sight that met me stopped me cold. There she was, Lisa, kneeling in the middle of the room. Her posture wasn't one of prayer or relaxation, it was rigid, statuesque. Her eyes, those beautiful eyes that had drawn me in, were now wide open, vacant, staring into nothingness. Her expression was one of someone lost in a deep trance or under some spell. Panicking, I tried calling her name, waving my hands, even lightly shaking her, desperate for a response. Nothing. The room grew colder, or perhaps it was just my fear. Memories of my family's warnings about Louisiana's dark arts clouded my mind. I grabbed my belongings in haste, pulling on my shoes as I stumbled out of the door. The outside air was a sharp contrast, almost suffocating in its warmth. But the sun and the familiar sounds of the world did little to comfort me. Hours later, as I tried to process the morning's events, my phone rang. It was Lisa. Her voice, once sweet and alluring, now carried a hint of irritation. She wanted to know why I'd left without saying goodbye. I relayed the chilling scene from the morning. Rather than expressing concern or offering an explanation, she laughed. Her amusement felt out of place, even mocking. "You have to come up with something better than that," she teased. I was dumbfounded. Here I was, expecting an explanation or at least shared concern, but all I got was ridicule. It became evident to me at that moment, regardless of the truth of voodoo or any local legends, I didn't want to find out more. Lisa and I never went on another date. I respected my family's warnings a bit more after that, even if it was just out of superstition. And every time I remembered that morning, the haunting image of her trance-like state reminded me of the mysteries and enigmas that Louisiana held. If you like this story, hit that subscribe. Also, if you have a scary story that you'll like to share, email us at grimreflections67@gmail.com.